I'm Bill Story of the Otherhood Group, and today I'm pleased to welcome our Chief Operating Officer, Robin Trimingham. Hi, Robin.
Hey, Bill. How are you doing today?
So Robin is a weekly columnist on Bermuda's national newspaper, the Royal Gazette. Her articles are shared around the world and get rave reviews, both locally and internationally. So we're starting a new series called the Ozone, and this is some video chat with Robin about some of her articles. So let's get started, Robin, I saw one that you'd written recently where I think you were asking the question of how could you describe a microwave to a caveman?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite analogies when I'm talking to people about the challenges of clear communication. Because if you think about it, on the surface, it seems incredibly simple. Most of us have a microwave right on our kitchen counter, and we all know it's a box. You open the door, you put some food in there, you push a couple buttons, and you get hot food. But how would you explain this device to somebody from a different age and time who had absolutely no pre-existing frame of reference in which to understand how the microwave works? You know, because there's no electricity, there's no cooked food, perhaps. It really makes you stop and think and be more aware of how you're explaining a topic. And it also makes you aware that you really do need to consider the person that you're trying to chat with. You know, how is your information going to be received by them? How is it going to be understandable by them, relatable by them? And really frame your thoughts before you open your mouth with your words.
Yeah, but don't you find, though, that sometimes the other person is maybe not paying full attention to what you're saying because they're trying to think up what they are going to say by way of response. In other words, they're kind of listening, but they're not really listening to the points that you're making deeply. So therefore, when it comes back, you end up saying, wait a minute, that's not what I said. This is what I said. So you've got to go through the whole thing all over again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the other big challenges with clear communication is the fact that most people are 80% internalizing, analyzing, thinking, as opposed to listening in the first place. And that's where a lot of communication breaks down, because if you're really busy thinking about, you know, the next point, as you said, as opposed to really listening and focusing on the other person, giving them your full attention, then how are you going to know what they really said? One of the ways to check yourself on this is to wait until they're done and say, okay, if I heard you correctly, you're telling me that X is the case. Is that the truth from your point of view? Is that what you're telling me? And the person goes, yeah, that's it. Or no, that's not it at all. And you have another go. It's really worth taking the time, particularly in a business context, particularly where we're working virtually, perhaps with somebody on the other side of the world, perhaps with somebody who English or whatever language we're communicating in isn't anybody's primary language. You know, you really need to slow down and make sure that you're going step by step and that everybody knows either what the situation is or what's being communicated.
Where do you put the stress on a particular word? And one phrase that comes to mind, which I've always chuckled at for many, many years, was the old one between the grandmother and the grandson, where the grandson says, "Let's eat, Grandma."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Where you put the inflection on a word in a sentence completely changes the meaning of the sentence. And it can be really hard especially if you have people who don't speak the same language. I remember chatting with a man from Sweden who told me that one of his friends had gone for a job interview. And the friend wasn't Swedish by birth, but he thought that he spoke this language quite well. He came out of the interview thinking he'd absolutely got the job. And the case was they had absolutely not got the job. So, where you put the inflection, it can radically change the meaning and the tone of the conversation.
Yeah, it's funny because I was on a conference call a couple of weeks ago where there must have been 10, 12, 15 people on it. And one of the people said, when I started to speak, they said, "Oh, you're Scottish." I said, "Yeah." They said, "Yes, I think I can just understand you." And I said, well, good. I'm pleased to hear that, because if I spoke in real heavy Scottish accent, from Glasgow or someplace like that, you would have no chance. So I think that term of we say communication, I think it's not just a case of how we speak or what we speak, but I think that one of the things that we're missing these days, obviously because of pandemic, is the ability to see each other face to face. In other words, to be in person, to have the conversation. Things like Zoom are fine, but that ability to be face to face, where you've got body language, you've got facial expression, you've got hands. I think a lot of us, me included, talk with our hands. Now, granted, with a camera in front of us, we can do that. But things like the body language and the facial expression are very, very important to be able to get the point that you are making over to that other person.
I think one of the things that people really need to realize about using virtual communication of any kind is that you just need to slow down and relax. If you are really self-aware of the fact that there's a camera staring you in the face and that there might be 20 other little people in the Zoom room or wherever we are watching you, if you're spending too much time focusing on yourself, how do you look, how are you coming across, instead of focusing on the conversation and the information being relayed to you, A, your communication is going to break down, and B, you're not going to be natural. You're not going to be yourself, and that's going to make it harder for other people to relate to you. Funnily enough, you reminded me of a famous joke by an expert in communication, and his name was Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan used to tell a joke. And the joke was, why does the electric drape hum? And the answer to the question is, it hums because it doesn't know the words. Except when this joke was told to me as a child, I couldn't understand that the person telling the joke was saying drape. I thought they were saying grape, as in the fruit that you eat. So I used to go running around telling this joke and thinking I was very, very funny. And I would run up to adults and ask them, why does an electric grape hum? And then I say, because it doesn't know the words. And I thought this was the funniest thing, and nobody else understood. But my point here is that just simply because of accents, because of poor internet connections, poor audio connections, whatever the case may be, sometimes you think that you've heard what's been said to you and you haven't heard it at all. So that brings back the point. It's really important to make sure that you're verifying what has been said, as opposed to assuming that you know what's been said, assuming that you understand it. Because that word assumption, that's how so many disagreements, misunderstandings start. Because you assumed that you knew what had been said to you and you didn't like what had been said to you.
Well, that's just about all we've got time for today. So we've been chatting with Robin Trimingham, weekly columnist for the Royal Gazette. Oh, and by the way, over her shoulder, you'll see the book that she's written called The Third Journey. So join us again in the Ozone.